Hey guys, Dylan here and welcome back. The internet is full of fictional scary stories and movies alike. But what I find more terrifying than these are the true scary stories that happen to real people like you and me every day. This episode covers a battle with one's personal courage, a family struggle with their haunted home, and a spring break nightmare. These are three terrifying true stories. I believe that we are all put on this earth for a reason. We all have a true calling, no matter how big or how small. This can be as seemingly large as having an elusive career as an astronaut, or as what is commonly perceived as being simple, such as setting a goal for the amount of books that you're willing to read in a given period of time. Despite all of this, many people never answer or find their true calling, but this wasn't the case for Aaron Ralston. Aaron Ralston was born on October 27, 1975, in Marion, Ohio. At age 12, his family and himself would move to Denver, Colorado. While attending high school at Cherry Creek, he would find himself taking up classes in skiing and backpacking, sparking an interest in the great outdoors and an interest that would find a special place in his heart for the rest of his life. After graduating high school, he found himself attending Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, studying mechanical engineering, ultimately preparing him for the 9-to-5 work rush just like everyone else. Upon graduating college, he'd find himself relocating to Arizona, working as an engineer for Intel at various different cities. Although he was living a life that many would be jealous of, Aaron had an itch that he could not scratch. He was constantly dreaming of a life of adventure, a life where he saw himself as a great mountaineer. And after 5 years of working for this large corporation, he found himself completely burnt out and he had enough. In 2002, he quit his job at Intel, and after saying goodbye to his friends, he hopped on a plane to Alaska to climb Denali. Following this, Aaron moved back to Colorado to live out a life of mountain climbing, residing in Aspen, and working on his goal of climbing all of Colorado's 14ers. On April 26, 2003, Aaron traveled to Utah's Canyonlands National Park. Here he had plans for a one-day solo canyoneering trip through a section of the park named Blue John Canyon. When Aaron came across a slot canyon, he decided to lower himself inside in an attempt to explore its lower stretches. When doing so, this caused a suspended boulder to dislodge. As it fell, it smashed his left hand before finally settling on top of Aaron's right hand, entrapping it. No matter how hard Aaron fought, attempting to dislodge his arm from the boulder, it did not budge. What was even more traumatizing to Aaron was when he realized that he had not told a single person where he had gone or what he was doing. He also had no means of communication. This meant that he was stranded all alone inside this massive national park, and no one was ever coming for him. And if he was found, it would have been more than likely long after he had perished. For the next 5 days, Aaron would slowly sip the small amount of water that he had brought with him, which was only about 350 milliliters. He also ate his small amount of food that he had brought with him, which consisted of 2 burritos. Over these 5 days, he fought desperately, trying to free his arm in every possible way he could think of. Aaron, knowing that it was unlikely that he would make it out of here alive, he prepared for death. Carving his name, birth date, and estimated date of his own death into the canyon wall. He then proceeded to record his final goodbyes to his family before falling into a hallucinate state. During this time, he had a vision of himself playing with his future son, but something was different. He was missing part of his right arm. By the morning of May 1st, Aaron made a decision that would change his life forever, when he decided he was going to get out of this canyon one way or another. And with only his multi-tool available, he did the unimaginable. Aaron Ralston then amputated his own arm, setting himself free. After this, Aaron scaled up the canyon wall that had imprisoned him for the past 5 days, before rappelling down a 65-foot sheer wall, accomplishing all of this with just one hand. He then continued on for 6 miles in the direction of his car, before running into a family on vacation from the Netherlands. Ralston would later be life-flighted from the canyon 4 hours after he amputated his own arm. Following this, Aaron Ralston would write a book titled Between a Rock and a Hard Place and make multiple media appearances. In 2010, a movie starring James Franco would be produced named 127 Hours, a biographical survival drama telling the story of Aaron Ralston's accident. On an evening in 1993, Denise Jones was preparing dinner for her family in their home in Manchester, Connecticut. While preparing for this meal, she heard a noise that made her stop in her tracks and running as fast as she could to the second story of her home. Her 5-year-old son, Michael, had let out a horrible-sounding scream, and when she arrived in his bedroom, she found him curled into the fetal position, shaking and screaming. He was completely terrified of what he had just seen, and with good reason. His 5-year-old mind could not grasp the concept of what he had just saw. Honestly, there are few people that could. Michael explained to his mother that he had just seen the face of a strange-looking man, and he smiled at him before moving his hand over to Michael, placing it on his shoulder before disappearing into thin air. A few days would go by following this incident, and Denise and her son Michael were visiting her parents' house. Denise visited with her parents while Michael explored his grandparents' home, playing by himself. Eventually, Denise and Michael's grandparents would listen as he started to scream at the top of his lungs, nearly knocking over the chairs to the kitchen table. Trying to move as fast as possible to reach Michael, the three would run in the direction of the screams. When they arrived, they found Michael standing in the middle of the room with his arms stretched out, pointing at a picture on the wall. "That's him," he said. Michael was pointing at his great-grandfather, Denise's grandfather, a man who had passed away 17 years prior, a man that Michael had never met. Michael would start to cry, and explaining as best as a 5-year-old could, he told his mother that there were evil spirits in this house, and that they wanted Michael to visit the other side with them. Following these strange events, Denise decided that it was time for some answers. So she would reach out to a paranormal investigator by the name of John Zaffis. Zaffis visited the home, investigating both the house and Michael. Zaffis would end up spending hundreds of hours documenting Michael's sightings, trying to explain them. making sure that Michael was neurologically sound and that these were not medical-related events. Zaffis and his crew would finally decide that Michael's sightings and stories were genuine. Michael also claims to see an entity that he calls the Shadow Man every single day. This evil spirit looks like the silhouette of a man that lurks in the shadows. As time went on, the Jones family realized that these evil spirits that lived in their home were growing more dangerous every single day. On one occasion, Michael's parents were awoken in the middle of the night when they heard an aggressive thumping noise coming from Michael's bedroom. Once they made it inside their son's room, they witnessed his bed violently shaking. On another occasion, Denise would bear witness to the same 6-foot-tall shadow man Michael had spoke of. She watched as it walked across the wall and disappeared. Other accounts told of Michael's violent encounters with these spirits. They physically tormented the child, hitting, scratching, and even biting him. Finally, enough was enough, and the Jones family would leave this house completely, moving into a new home. The new comfort found in their home was shortly lived as the attacks continued. It was as if the spirits had followed Michael. Eventually, 4 exorcisms would be performed in an attempt to rid these evil spirits from Michael. But this too was to no avail. Michael continues to see spirits. On October 1st, 2000, a book would be published titled The Other Side, The True Story of the Boy Who Sees Ghosts, wrote by Michael's mother, Denise Jones, a true account of her son's experiences. In 1989, Mark Kilroy was attending college at the University of Texas, majoring in pre-med. It was his senior year of college, and in March of the same year, with graduation ascending upon him, himself and 3 of his best friends decided that it was time to celebrate, and planned a spring break trip to Mexico. One last hurrah, if you might. The 4 friends were extremely close. They had known each other very well since high school, where they all shared a common bond of playing basketball in Mark's hometown of Santa Fe, Texas, a small town outside of Houston. On March 10th, 1989, after finishing finals, Bill Huddleston, Bradley Moore, and Brett Martin joined Mark in his car and left for the Mexican border. Once arriving in the border town of Brownsville, Texas, the group of 4 would continue on foot, crossing into Matamoros. Once in Matamoros, they would spend the rest of the night until around 2:30 a.m. partying within the city, before returning to their hotel room back in Brownsville on U.S. soil. The following day, March 11th, 1989, they continued as the night prior. But this time, while the group stumbled their way home after a long night of partying, they stopped momentarily to urinate. While this act was being performed, Huddleston noticed a Hispanic man with a scar on his face approaching Kilroy, speaking to him and saying something along the lines of, "Didn't I see you somewhere?" or "Where did I see you last?" Huddleston didn't think much of this at the time. Once the 3 were done urinating, Mark Kilroy had vanished, along with the Hispanic man. By the next morning, Mark Kilroy's disappearance had officially become a missing persons case. His parents had distributed 20,000 leaflets all across the Rio Grande Valley, and a reward was posted for $15,000 for any information regarding their son's disappearance. On April 11th, Safarian Hernandez Garcia, a 20-year-old drug dealer, would be arrested for possession of marijuana, ultimately unraveling the twisted details of Mark Kilroy's disappearance. Garcia would admit that his family grew cannabis at a ranch named Santa Elena, located just outside of town. This would be where Commandant Juan Benitez Ayala would discover what one witness later described as a human slaughterhouse. Multiple shallow graves were discovered, holding a total of 15 dismembered corpses, and Garcia would admit that Kilroy was among the victims. A member of the Cameron County Sheriff Department, Lieutenant George Gavito, would state, "I've been on the force for 15 years, and there are no words to describe what I saw there." Like the other 14 victims, Kilroy had fell victim to a satanic cult led by Adolfo Constanzo. Sarah Aldretti, one of the cult's most loyal members, was a 24-year-old student at the Texas Southmost College, and she was known for targeting inebriated tourists, much like Mark Kilroy, and luring them to this slaughterhouse, where they would be mutilated. Mark Kilroy's death would indirectly lead to the cult's demise. A manhunt would be launched for the cult's leader, Constanzo, and before his capture, he had one of his followers shoot himself. Other members, including Aldretti, would receive prison sentences of 30 to 60 years. That is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, if you're a fan of unsolved mysteries, the unexplained, and creepy stories, please do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. As always, if you have a future story suggestion, please share.